Hi, I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Wanted to show you as much as I could from the Nevada Rail Plan. And because of the number of tools that we developed, it's just good to see them because you won't see them in any other rail plan in the country. And Peter mentioned the financings that we've done in 45 states, and I just want to mention one in particular. There's a railroad in the middle of Iowa called the Iowa Northern Railway. It runs about 142 miles, and the short line owner came to me in 2007, finding himself in the middle of the ethanol boom, but with a railroad that needed $20 million in investment. And we solved it by placing that railroad for really all the stakeholders in the state, as well as each county that that rail line went through. We sort of shined a light on what it actually meant for so many other aspects of the community and its businesses. I'll never forget, I arranged to take his own banker on a tour of the railroad. And they had been doing business since Dan was in high school. And at the end of the trip, the local banker, he said, you know, my office was 4 doors away from this railroad. I had no idea that it stretched in 140 miles in 2 directions and serves all the towns that our bank also serves. So we were able to bring a total of $42 million to his development, and the rest was history. There's, I wanted to find out, why is it that this industry that was the reason capital flowed from around the world into North America in the 19th century, why did it need me to come along to start solving its biggest finance challenges? And so I studied the history of railroads and business and lending and banks, and found that over time, there was just this divergence of understanding that left a growing number of short-line railroads, and yet banks went the other direction in terms of not having local commercial finance ability. And so it's been in bringing them together and then in bringing what the meaning of local rail development is for various state agencies, and bringing them all together around support programs and support funding. So I have done that on behalf of individual clients for my career in railroads, 3 decades now. And then I've observed the fact that rail plans and freight plans are created, but they're not commercially relevant. They're sort of reports and studies utilizing past trends, past history, projecting it into the future, generally identifying choke points and saying, well, we need money to move, to deal with choke points. And so I've written a lot about this, and in the state of Nevada, one of the personnel in their DOT read what I'd written and thought we could do something unique in Nevada. So we were contracted to do a state rail plan. For those of you that don't know, the US DOT requires every state DOT to submit a rail plan every, now 4 years, it was 5 years. Unfortunately, the way the contractual agreements work is that as soon as that plan is written, the money's been used up. There's no funding for implementation. And we had, in our proposal, said, we're only doing this to implement it. This is not just to produce another report. So this is a post-plan. We started enrolling the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development because this was really a statewide rail-enabled economic development strategy. And I could see that the DOT was not going to be in position to oversee or partner with us in the plan's implementation. So we started going to every state has a cabinet level economic development authority, and explaining to them how this was for the whole state and that we had identified commercial opportunities that would serve not only the populated sections of the state, but the local, every county in the state that had railroads at all. This letter is from the Governor Sisolak of Nevada to Governor Newsom, because during the creating of this plan, we identified that Nevada is, particularly in its rail network as well as its highway network, it's a through state. That's the case for a lot of states. And that to implement the plan, we would really need to do it as a multi-state endeavor. You can only do so much on a state's rail network, and really what you're dealing with are supply chains. You can only do so much if you're only going to look within the state lines. In the case of Nevada, our deep data analysis pointed out that 70% of every truck moving in the state, anywhere in the state, on that trip is in the process of driving to or from California. So the state's being used as a new warehouse and distribution hub, only not for Nevada, actually for California, because those goods, after they go into the warehouses in Nevada, are actually going back into truck and going back to California. So Nevada's proximity to California, and every state is different. That's creating quite a problem, because the development that's happening in Nevada is almost all truck served. So let me, I want to go over the tools first, so you can see the tools, and then we can talk about the principles that, that gave rise to those tools. So whereas most rail plans are done with the main lines as the focus and congestion and choke points of the main line, this is a plan and a model for state plans that actually gets to what do the existing and potential businesses in a state actually need to improve their rail logistics, their logistics overall, and particularly the rail. So we started by creating a database, which we then mapped. And if you just scroll down, John, we came up with a methodology for identifying every single sidetrack in a state and what business is on the property that sidetrack connects to. I guess not working yet, huh? Oh, good. I just couldn't see it on mine. Thank you. So this is pages. You can scroll down to, we identified 550 sidetracks and found that in the state of Nevada, out of 137 large warehouses, mostly built in the last 10 years, only half of one uses rail. All the rest are truck only. So when you think of a rail plan, they're filled with rail data. We thought, is rail data that useful in a rail plan? That's traffic that already is priced well, it's already getting its service agreements, it's already connected. Not a lot you can do with rail data in a rail plan. It's truck data that you need in a rail plan, because the focus of a rail plan should be converting as much traffic from truck to rail as makes sense. So you'll see we get to, go ahead to the next section. No, same tab, just scroll down a little more. Keep going, you can scroll through that quickly. And we came up with another methodology for identifying every truckload shipper in a state. It's never been done before. And these are all the rail sidings throughout the state. Keep going to the next section. There you go. Nevada truckload shippers, and then one more page. And this is the start of the 573 truckload quantity shippers that we identified. And every one of those names on the left is a link to their website. And now we're going to show you that this kind of data still isn't good enough. Remember, this is an action plan, not a report. We wanted to not only assemble data, it's not really for USDOT. They're never going to do anything with any of these rail plans. This is actually for stakeholders in the state to get a hold of what they need to know so that they can do proper local rail development. If you go to the next slide, next tab, excuse me, John. So this was not about us and my team as much as it is, who are the folks in the state that are already active and interested in rail development? Well, you've got your largest landowners in the state, land developers, your economic developers, your counties, your towns. Everybody's interested in rail development, particularly at this point in time. So we gathered 550 stakeholders, communicated with all of them, and formed them into regional teams. Those different colors are the teams that made sense in Nevada. Of course, Texas would look totally different in its regionality as a function of its rail network, its demographics, its economic interests. And so we formed 8 teams and made all of this data available to them, as well as the knowledge and information that they need to do, to think about rail properly. So if you go to the next tab, you'll start to see what this combination of identifying side tracks and properties along nearby rail lines, what it actually makes possible. And this is Henderson, which is a town right next to Las Vegas. The yellow lines are the rail lines. The only businesses using rail, I guess are the black dots. All the other businesses are that close to rail infrastructure and not using rail. Not the red ones, not the blue ones, not the purple ones, only the black dots. If you go to the next tab, we'll show you in northern Nevada. This is in Reno Stead, just north of, just Reno. And again, you'll see that the only businesses using rail, even though you'll see sidings into other buildings, the only ones using rail are black. And we did this for all of the industrial areas of Nevada. Additionally, thanks to the fantastic chief cartographer in NDOT, we took all of this mapping data and all this stakeholder data and shipper data and put it into a 10-layer web map, first of its kind. I think it might be the next tab. So this is a online 10-layer web map where all the data, who's on every team, where every truckload shipper is, where every property along a rail line is, where the rail lines are, where the roads are, where the enterprise zones are, the opportunity zones. While we're here, that large pink, that's the famous Gigafactory that Tesla built. You'll notice there's no rail line to it, even though, by the way, this is one of the 5 largest industrial parks in the world, built over the last 10 years. And 4% of the freight moving in and out of that industrial park moves by rail. Tesla themselves ship 75 tractor trailers every single day of the year from there to Fremont in Northern California, where they also have rail. It's all going by truck. It's 75 tractor trailers a night, and they're coming back empty. That's 36,000 trucks that are going over the Donner Pass between Nevada and California. And we were able, using this approach of focusing on every shipper, we were able to point out an excellent right-of-way to take the rail the last 2 miles and get right to their plant. So, one other tool I won't be able to show with this technique we're using here, and that's that, go back to the tab right before that one. This relates to the point I made that it's critical to have truck data in a rail plan. This is where just one of the many tables that we put together to shine a light on what's actually happening with truck flows. And this is where we determined that 77% of the total tons are moving by truck. And again, every state is different, but many states are pass-through states. Increasingly, the way the rail network works, less and less attention on local rail development. In Nevada, 83% of all the rail traffic comes in one end of the state, goes out the other end of the state. Of all the freight moving in the state, only 4% moves by rail to or from a Nevada business. And less than 0.25% moves by rail to from and to a Nevada business. Less than 0.25%. That's an interesting dynamic, given that the number 2 industry in Nevada is mining. Heavy materials coming in, heavy materials going out, in addition, all types of aggregates, minerals, ore, and it's moving by truck. And when you don't have a robust intrastate rail network, in other words, the ability to move goods and material from sources to processing plants and manufacturing plants, it's a lot like what happens in a developing country, where the investor builds a rail line to a mine and pulls it out to the port and gets it on a ship as quickly as possible. You don't have a robust then local economy. You don't have what's called economic beneficiation. And many states in the United States are in that same dynamic. There's Maine, Mississippi, just ample forest products, forest reserves, unharvested. One of the main reasons is that they don't have the efficient logistics, rail logistics, that you need to make moving a lot of different commodities feasible. And that's what you have in Nevada, where it's interesting because the number 1 industry, of course, as we know, is entertainment and tourism. It now takes, sometimes on a Sunday night, for tourists to go from Las Vegas to back to San Pedro Bay, 15 hours instead of the 5 or 6 hour drive that it should be. Some of that is the volume of cars. A lot of it is the volume of trucks that we have. And point that I wanted to mention is, particularly with the increased talk about short line railroads, there's what's supposedly a truism about railroads that we've all heard one version or another of railroads, rail transportation not being viable at less than 750 miles. Sometimes it's 500 miles. Sometimes it's 1,000 miles. But if you think about it, there's 600 non-Class 1 railroads in the United States. They average 72 miles each. They're almost all stable, from marginally profitable to highly profitable. So there is nothing inherent about rail transportation that makes it economical or uneconomical at a certain distance. It's a combination of many factors, and there are short line railroads that are 4 miles long that produce enormous amounts of profits from those 4 miles. Some of you will know of the Nevada Northern Railway. It's sort of a famous old-time mining-oriented railroad in eastern Nevada that's now its claim to fame as being the host of the Star Train, Night Star Train, because it's so dark there. It's very popular to go out in the middle of the desert on the train. And, but there's a number of potential rail users along this line. And we actually last week in Nevada gathered all the shippers, potential shippers together to find out, would you be interested in pooling your opportunity? in being part of a feasibility analysis for rebuilding the Nevada Northern Railway. Because so much of rail plans and rail business narrowly focuses in on one project, and then one project, and one project, and that's belies the nature of infrastructure. Infrastructure needs to be thought of to serve whole communities. And in the case of transportation and supply chain infrastructure, it needs to be conceived to serve whole regions and whole corridors. That's why you can't just focus in on a rail line within a state or one project or one choke point. What matters is where are the goods coming from and going to. So in this case, if scroll down just a little bit to the next page, these are a handful of the potential users that are along this line, and as well as what we did for each of the 8 regions, we identified all of the mines that are in that region. There was another tab. Go back to, yeah, one more back, John. That's the one with all the projects on it. So this was from Chapter 5, and these chapters are prescribed by US DOT as to what you have to, how many chapters, what you name them, and we endeavored to fill it. So stop there. So this is 43 different private sector rail development opportunities, totaling $580 million. That's not their own business expansion. That's just the rail infrastructure that's needed. Now, why do we have 43 projects here? Interestingly, go down to the next slide, next page, excuse me, and you'll see what Union Pacific wanted us to put in the plan. 3, by the way, there are no short line railroads in Nevada, much different than Texas, obviously. So all the track is owned by Union Pacific, with Burlington Northern having service rights in the north. So one of the main themes of this type of rail plan, one is that there's ample private sector capital available for rail development. This does not have to be a public sector burden or expense to build out your freight rail infrastructure. By the way, there's a robust passenger rail component of the Nevada State Rail Plan. I'm speaking today about the freight component. So it's generally thought, because DOTs, state DOTs, are so used to overseeing public dollars flowing into publicly owned assets, that when it comes to freight rail development, the same thinking tends to get applied as if we have to fund rail development. But we say, don't fund freight rail development unless it makes sense for someone. And it usually does, which means there's private sector businesses that are going to make money and save money. It's the job of it can be the job of the DOT and the state to do the cross-agency, cross-sector, cross-business, cross-county coordination to conceive of a statewide business plan like this. And so we filled this with 43 individual projects that the private sector can fund, the shippers, as well as the investment fund that we're now in gear creating with the state's state infrastructure bank. Some of you would know that there is so many hundreds of billions of dollars in the hands of the infrastructure investment firms that want nothing more than to see the North American rail industry grow so that they have viable projects to invest in. They tend to have to settle for the next toll road or bridge project or privatization of a water project. But in fact, they would love nothing more than to invest in this kind of coherent, statewide, publicly sector supported plan.